Hello and welcome to Shannon Gardens. Thank you guys so much for joining me. So today I wanted to talk a bit about orchids and specifically phalaenopsis orchids. I have been taking classes on orchid care for quite some time now and wanted to impart some of the information that I've learned in those classes as well as hands-on information I've learned just in taking care of them myself. Now, phalaenopsis orchids are the ones that you will find probably most commonly. You can find them anywhere in grocery stores or at Home Depot or Lowe's or in your local nurseries. You just can find them anywhere in a variety of colors and sizes. Now, orchids are the third largest family of flowering plants, which I found to be remarkable. There's so many different types of orchids out there, and there are over 50 varieties of phalaenopsis orchids that occur from tropical Asia, from India to the Philippines, New Guinea, and Australia. They are epiphytes and grow naturally in trees rather than in soil, and their roots have little hairs on them that attach to the bark on the trees. However, they don't take anything from the trees. They are just using them to hold on to and to grow onto. Because of this, it's most recommended when growing them at home to plant them in a very coarse planting medium, such as orchid bark, and in an orchid pot to help encourage excellent drainage as well as airflow. Now, the temperature range that they suggest is a max temperature of 85 degrees during the day and then a minimum temperature of 62 degrees in the evening. I did see, though, that if you do have it over 82 degrees, that it may inhibit flowering. So just bear that in mind when you are looking to place these in your home. Also, regarding lighting, they do like bright light, but indirect light. So you'll want to make sure that they aren't sitting in direct light in that sun or it could burn the leaves. Now, when watering, you can water a couple of different ways. You can either water from the top of the plant or you can soak the roots, whichever one you prefer. You just want to make sure that when you are watering that you do not get water on the leaves, or if you do, just make sure to carefully wipe it up. I usually take a little paper towel and wipe that up so that I don't have any rot in that area. And then also make sure that your water drains out well. So when you place it back in your pot, it's not sitting in water. And again, that's to avoid rot. Now, I generally water about once a week, sometimes a little bit longer, and I always check the plant to make sure that it needs to be watered. So I will take a look at the bark and see if it's lightened up or if it's still dark from the last watering and therefore still has water in it. And I will also feel the roots to make sure that they feel pretty dry, moderately dry before watering them again. But it averages out to be about once a week. I do generally just water from the top of the plant and thoroughly water, and then I set that out and let that drain out completely before placing it back in my pot. To show you guys what I'm talking about, as far as where exactly I water, I've got my reblooming. This is one of my reblooming orchids here that you can see I've just got in a standard pot, but when I take it out, it is in a plastic container that has holes for good drainage, and I simply water it from the top of the medium. So the base here of the plant, the top of the medium, make sure to thoroughly soak it, and then I leave it in this pot to drain completely before placing it back into its regular pot inside there. Now, with phalaenopsis orchids, it's not really recommended to miss these orchids. Again, you're trying to avoid rot, and so it's not really recommended. However, if you are concerned about humidity, one thing that is suggested is that you can place your pot. So you could place, for instance, this pot here in a shallow tray with little pebbles and very shallow water. Now, that being said, I keep all of my orchids in a bathroom where the shower is regularly used so that it actually does get humidity a couple times a day. And then I move it out of the bathroom when they are flowering, and I'll decorate the house with them and put them wherever I want them. But as soon as they stop flowering, they go back into that space. Now, I also put them there not only for the humidity, but really because I get bright indirect light in there, and that is the best space for it and for my orchids to thrive in my home. Now, the recommended fertilizing schedule is half strength water soluble orchid fertilizer about every couple weeks. Now, as far as repotting, Phalaenopsis actually prefer to be more root bound and will generally flower more when they are. However, I did ask in one of the classes that I took if there's some kind of definition or just something to go by as far as maybe the root to soil ratio. And I was given about 80% roots to 20% soil. And when you get to about that mark is when you'll want to change out your bark, your orchid bark, for new medium, or if your bark is looking more like soil than bark and it's broken down a lot, that's another reason to repot. Now, when you do repot, you want to increase that space that you're allowing the orchid. You'll want to increase it minimally. I was told that if you repot in too big of a pot, then it just may take it a couple of growing seasons to actually flower again as it takes up space. So really, ideally, it's best to increase it slowly. When repotting, you can also place your plant a little bit higher than the base of your medium, and that's just going to provide a little bit more airflow, which they enjoy. But I wouldn't do it a lot. I would just do it slightly elevated if you do choose to do that. There are several different things to bear in mind when you go to remove your flower spike and when you go to prune your orchid. First of all, you generally want to remove that spike after it flowers, not before, or you may not get your flowers. There are a few different things that you can bear in mind, and I think I've probably done all these things. You can remove your flower spike after all the way to the base of the plant after it has flowered. When you cut it at the base after flowering, that seems to be the most recommended way to do it because it allows the plant to re-energize and produce new roots, to produce new leaves, and then to have enough energy to bloom the next flowering season. Now, you can try to get your orchid to rebloom on a existing flower spike. This does not always work, but it can work sometimes. So if you would like to try that, you can. And what you do, or what is suggested there, is that you want to go and cut in between the two nodes that are behind the last bloom on the stem and cut it about midway at an angle. Now, I have not done this necessarily. However, I have left my flower spikes just to die back and then cut them when they have died back, which is your third option that you can do with your orchids. And I have sometimes only had them die back about halfway and then rebloom on that existing flower spike. And I'll show you an example of that because I have one that just did it. So here, hopefully you guys can see this. This is obviously had died back, but only to this area here. So it did not die all the way back before producing another stem and buds, which this one just opened, and you can see that there are a couple more here. So I have had this happen, but I would say that it is pretty rare that it does, at least in my case. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the last thing that you could do is just leave it and see what happens. And then if it does turn yellow or brown, then you can cut it all the way down, which is what I generally tend to do. Sometimes out of laziness, because I just tend to forget to cut it down after it blooms, or sometimes I just kind of want to see what happens. So I let it do what it likes. Now, when you are cutting or pruning your flower spikes, be sure that you are using a sterile cutting tool, and you'll want to sterilize it in between your orchid plants so that if one does have a disease, you aren't transferring it to the other one. So I did want to show you guys some of the phalaenopsis that I do currently have that's blooming, such as this one, which is a rebloom actually, and it's got a couple more buds to open here. And then I have this phalaenopsis, which is just starting to bloom, and this is also a rebloom. It has two flower spikes, And this is the one that is blooming the second flower spike on one that only died halfway and then decided to rebloom here halfway up the stem. And then I have this one that's blooming. This actually has quite a few buds that's still left to bloom, which I'm very excited about. And I love the coloring with the yellow green color in the background and then the purple stripes. I just think that that offsets so nicely. It pairs so nicely together and is very striking. And then last but certainly not least is this one just about to rebloom. I honestly do not remember what color it is, so it'll be like having a new plant once it does rebloom. And I expect that that should open up here in the next couple of weeks. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I love talking about orchids and just I find them fascinating flowers and so interesting to learn about. Thank you guys so much again. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, happy gardening and goodbye.